Day 3, the fourth story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eugene Smith. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 3, the fourth story. Dom Felice instructs Fra Puccio how to attain blessedness by doing a penance. Fra Puccio does the penance, and meanwhile Dom Felice has a good time with Fra Puccio's wife.
When Filomena, having concluded her story, was silent, and Dioneo had added a few honeyed phrases in praise of the lady's wit and Philomena's closing prayer, the Queen glanced with a smile to Pamphilo and said, "Now, Pamphilo, give us some pleasant trifle to speed our delight." "That gladly I will," returned forthwith Pamphilo, and then,
Madam,
he began.
not a few there are that, while they use their best endeavours to get themselves places in paradise, do, by inadvertence, send others thither, as did, not long ago, betide a fair neighbour of ours, as you shall hear. Hard by San Pancrazio there used to live, as I have heard tell, a worthy man and wealthy, Puccio di Ranieri by name, who, in later life, under an overpowering sense of religion, became a tertiary of the Order of St. Francis, and was thus known as Fra Puccio, in which spiritual life he was the better able to persevere that his household consisted but of a wife and a maid, and having no need to occupy himself with any craft, he spent no small part of his time at church, where, being a simple soul and slow of wit, he said his paternosters, heard sermons, assisted at the Mass, never missed lauds, that is, when chanted by the seculars, fasted and mortified his flesh. Nay, so 'twas whispered, he was of the flagellants. His wife, Monna Isabetta by name, a woman of from 28 to 30 summers, still young for her age, lusty, comely, and plump as a Castellan apple, had not unfrequently, by reason of her husband's devoutness, if not also of his age, more than she cared for, of abstinence. And when she was sleepy, or maybe riggish, he would repeat to her the life of Christ and the sermons of Fra Anastasio, or the lament of the Magdalene, or the like. Now, while such was the tenor of her life, there returned from Paris a young monk by name Dom Felice, of the convent of San Pancrazio, a well-favoured man and keen-witted, and profoundly learned, with whom Fra Puccio became very intimate. And as there was no question which he could put to him but Dom Felice could answer it, and moreover he made great show of holiness, for well he knew Fra Puccio's bent, Fra Puccio took to bringing him home and entertaining him at breakfast and supper, as occasion served. And for love of her husband, the lady also grew familiar with Dom Felice, and was zealous to do him honour. So the monk, being a constant visitor of Fra Puccio's house, and seeing the lady so lusty and plump, surmised that of which she must have most lack, and made up his mind to afford, if he could, at once relief to Puccio and contentment to the lady. So cautiously, now and again, he cast an admiring glance in her direction with such effect that he kindled in her the same desire with which he burned, and, marking his success, took the first opportunity to declare his passion to her. He found her fully disposed to gratify it, but how this might be he was at a loss to discover, for she would not trust herself with him in any place whatever except her own house, and there it could not be, because Fra Puccio never travelled, whereby the monk was greatly dejected. Long he pondered the matter, and at length thought of an expedient, whereby he might be with the lady in her own house, without incurring suspicion, notwithstanding that Fra Puccio was there. So, being with Fra Puccio one day, he said to him, Reasons many have I to know, Fra Puccio, that all thy desire is to become a saint. But it seems to me that thou farest by a circuitous route, whereas there is one very direct, which the Pope and the greater prelates that are about him know and use, but will have it remain a secret, because otherwise the clergy, who for the most part live by alms, could not then expect alms or aught else from the laity, would be speedily ruined. However, as thou art my friend, and hast shown me much honour, I would teach thee that way, if I were assured that thou wouldst follow it without letting another soul in the world hear of it. Fra Puccio was now all agog to hear more of the matter, and began most earnestly entreating Dom Felice to teach him the way, swearing that without Dom Felice's leave none should ever hear of it from him, and averring that, if he found it practicable, he would certainly follow it. "I am satisfied with thy promises," said the monk, "and I will show thee the way. Know then that the holy doctors hold that whoso would achieve blessedness must do the penance of which I shall tell thee. But see thou take me judiciously. I do not say that after the penance thou wilt not be a sinner, as thou art, but the effect will be that the sins which thou hast committed up to the very hour of the penance will be purged away and thereby remitted to thee, and the sins which thou shalt commit thereafter will not be written against thee to thy damnation, but will be quit by holy water, like venial sins. First of all, then, the penitent must with great exactitude confess his sins when he comes to begin the penance. Then follows a period of fasting and very strict abstinence, which must last for 40 days, during which time he is to touch no woman whomsoever, not even his wife. Moreover, thou must have in thy house some place whence thou mayest see the sky by night, whither thou must resort at Compline. And there thou must have a beam, very broad, and placed in such a way that, standing, thou canst rest thy nether part upon it, and so, not raising thy feet from the ground, thou must extend thy arms so as to make a sort of crucifix, and if thou wouldst have pegs to rest them on, thou mayst. And on this manner, thy gaze fixed on the sky, and never moving a jot, thou must stand until matins. And wert thou lettered, it were proper for thee to say meanwhile certain prayers that I would give thee, but as thou art not so, thou must say 300 paternosters and as many Ave Marias in honour of the Trinity. And thus contemplating the sky, be ever mindful that God was the creator of the heaven and the earth, and being set even as Christ was upon the cross, meditate on his passion. Then, when the matin bell sounds, thou mayest, if thou please, go to bed, but see that thou undress not, and sleep. But in the morning thou must go to church, and hear at least 3 masses, and say 50 paternosters and as many Ave Marias. After which thou mayest with a pure heart do aught that thou hast to do, and breakfast. But at vespers thou must be again at church, and say there certain prayers, which I shall give thee in writing, and which are indispensable, and after Compline thou must repeat thy former exercise. Do this, and I, who have done it before thee, have good hope that even before thou shalt have reached the end of the penance, thou wilt, if thou should do it in a devout spirit, have already a marvellous foretaste of the eternal blessedness. This, said Fra Puccio, is neither a very severe nor a very long penance, and can be very easily arranged, wherefore in God's name I will begin on Sunday. And so he took his leave of Dom Felice, and went home, and by Dom Felice's permission informed his wife of every particular of his intended penance. The lady understood very well what the monk meant by enjoining him not to stir from his post until matins, and deeming it an excellent device, she said that she was well content that he should do this, or aught else that he thought good for his soul, and to the end that his penance might be blessed of God, she would herself fast with him, though she would go no further. So they did as they had agreed, When Sunday came, Fra Puccio began his penance, and Master Monk, by understanding with the lady, came, most evenings, at the hour when he was secure from discovery, to sup with her, always bringing with him abundance both of meat and of drink, and after slept with her till the matin hour, when he got up and left her, and Fra Puccio went to bed. The place where Fra Puccio had chosen for his penance was close to the room in which the lady slept, and only separated from it by the thinnest of partitions, so that, the monk and the lady disporting themselves with one another without stint or restraint, Fra Puccio thought he felt the floor of the house shake a little, and pausing at his 100th paternoster, but without leaving his post, called out to the lady to know what she was about. The lady, who dearly loved a jest, and was just then riding the horse of Saint Benedict or Saint John Gualbert, answered, "I'faith, husband, I'm as restless as may be." "Restless?" said Fra Puccio, "how so? What means this restlessness?" Whereto, with a hearty laugh, for which she doubtless had good occasion, the bonny lady replied, "What means it? How should you ask such a question? Why, I have heard you say 1,000 times, 'Who fasting goes to bed, uneasy lies his head.'" Fra Puccio, supposing that her wakefulness and restlessness abed was due to want of food, said in good faith, "Wife, I told thee I would have thee not fast. But as thou hast chosen to fast, think not of it, but think how you mayest compose thyself to sleep. Thou tossest about the bed in such sort that the shaking is felt here." "That need cause thee no alarm," rejoined the lady. "I know what I am about. I will manage as well as I can, and do thou likewise." So Fra Puccio said no more to her, but resumed his paternosters. And thenceforth, every night, while Fra Puccio's penance lasted, the lady and Master Monk, having had a bed made up for them in another part of the house, did there wanton it most gamesomely, the monk departing and the lady going back to her bed, at one and the same time, being shortly before Fra Puccio's return from his nightly vigil. The friar thus persisting in his penance while the lady took her fill of pleasure with the monk, she would from time to time say jestingly to him, "Thou layest a penance upon Fra Puccio whereby we are rewarded with paradise." So well indeed did she relish the dainties with which the monk regaled her, the more so by contrast with the abstemious life to which her husband had long accustomed her, that, when Fra Puccio's penance was done, she found means to enjoy them elsewhere, and ordered her indulgence with such discretion as to ensure its long continuance. Whereby, that my story may end as it began, it came to pass that Fra Puccio, hoping by his penance to win a place for himself in paradise, did, in fact, translate thither the monk who had shown him the way, and the wife who lived with him in great dearth of that which the monk, in his charity, gave her superabundant largesse. End of Day 3, the fourth story.
The fifth story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 3, the fifth story. Zima gives a palfrey to Messer Francesco Vergellesi, who in return suffers him to speak with his wife. She keeping silence, he answers in her stead, and the sequel is in accordance with his answer.
When Pamphilo had brought the story of Fra Puccio to a close amid the laughter of the ladies, the queen debonairly bade Elisa to follow suit, and she, whose manner had in it a slight touch of severity, which betokened not despite, but was habitual to her, thus began.
Many there are that being very knowing think that others are quite the reverse, and so many a time thinking to beguile others, are themselves beguiled. Wherefore I deem it the height of folly for any one wantonly to challenge another to a contest of wit. But as perchance all may not be of the same opinion, I am minded, without deviating from the prescribed order, to acquaint you with that which thereby befell a certain knight of Pistoia. Know then that at Pistoia there lived a knight, Messer Francesco by name, of the Vercellesi family, a man of much wealth and good parts, being both wise and clever, but withal niggardly beyond measure. Which Messer Francesco, having to go to Milan in the capacity of podestà, had provided himself with all that was meet for the honourable support of such a dignity, save only a palfrey handsome enough for him, and not being able to come by any such, he felt himself at a loss. Now there was then in Pistoia a young man, Ricciardo by name, of low origin but great wealth, who went always so trim and fine and foppish of person, that folk had bestowed upon him the name of Zima, by which he was generally known. Zima had long and to no purpose burned and yearned for love of Messer Francesco's very fair and no less virtuous wife. His passion was matter of common notoriety, and so it befell that some one told Messer Francesco that he had but to ask Zima, who was the possessor of one of the handsomest palfreys in Tuscany, which on that account he greatly prized, and he would not hesitate to give him the horse for the love which he bore his wife. So our niggardly knight sent for Zima, and offered to buy the horse of him, hoping thereby to get him from Zima as a gift. Zima heard the knight gladly, and thus made answer: "Sell you my horse, sir, I would not, though you gave me all that you have in the world; but I shall be happy to give him to you when you will, on this condition, that before he pass into your hands, I may, by your leave and in your presence, say a few words to your wife, so privately that I may be heard by her alone." Thinking at once to gratify his cupidity and to outwit Zima, the knight answered that he was content that it should be even as Zima wished. Then, leaving him in the hall of the palace, he went to his lady's chamber, and told her the easy terms on which he might acquire the palfrey, bidding her give Zima his audience, but on no account to vouchsafe him a word of reply. This the lady found by no means to her mind, but, as she must needs obey her husband's commands, she promised compliance, and followed him into the hall to hear what Zima might have to say. Zima then renewed his contract with the knight in due form, whereupon the lady being seated in a part of the hall where she was quite by herself, he sat down by her side, and thus began: "Noble lady, I have too much respect for your understanding to doubt that you have long been well aware of the extremity of passion whereto I have been brought by your beauty, which certainly exceeds that of any other lady that I have ever seen, to say nothing of your exquisite manners and incomparable virtues, which might well serve to captivate every soaring spirit that is in the world. Wherefore there need no words of mine to assure you that I love you with a love greater and more ardent than any that man yet bore to woman, and so without doubt I shall do, as long as my woeful life shall hold this frame together, nay longer yet, for if love there be in the next world as in this, I shall love you evermore. And so you may make your mind secure that there is nothing that is yours, be it precious or be it common, which you may count as in such, and so sure a sort your own as me, for all that I am and have, and that thereof you may not lack evidence of infallible cogency, I tell you that I should deem myself more highly favored, if I might, at your command, do somewhat to pleasure you, than if at my command the whole world were forthwith to yield me obedience. And as 'tis even in such sort that I am yours, 'tis not unworthily that I make bold to offer my petitions to your Highness, as being to me the sole exclusive source of all peace, of all bliss, of all health. Wherefore, as your most lowly vassal, I pray you, dear my bliss, my soul's one hope, wherein she nourishes herself in love's devouring flame, that in your great benignity you deign so far to mitigate the harshness which in the past you have shown towards me, yours thought I am, that consoled by your compassion, I may say that, as 'twas by your beauty that I was smitten with love, so 'tis to your pity that I owe my life, which if in your haughtiness you lend not ear unto my prayers, will assuredly fail, so that I shall die, and it may be 'twill be said that you slew me. 'Twould not redound to your honor that I died for love of you, but let that pass, I cannot but think, however, that you would sometimes feel a touch of remorse, and would grieve that 'twas your doing, and that now and again, relenting, you would say to yourself, ah, how wrong it was of me that I had not pity on my Zima, by which too late repentance you would but enhance your grief. Whereof, that this come not to pass, repent you while it is in your power to give me ease, and show pity on me before I die, seeing that with you it rests to make me either the gladdest or the saddest man that lives. My trust is in your generosity, that will not brook that a love so great, and of such a sort as mine, should receive death for guerdon, and that by a gladsome and gracious answer you will repair my shattered spirits, which are all a tremble in your presence for very fear. When he had done, he heaved several very deep sighs, and a few tears started from his eyes, while he awaited the lady's answer. Long time he had wooed her with his eyes, had tilted in her honor, had greeted her rising with music, and against these and all like modes of attack she had been proof, but the heartfelt words of her most ardent lover were not without their effect, and she now began to understand what she had never till then understood, to wit, what love really means. So albeit she obeyed her lord's behest and kept silence, yet she could not but betray by a slight sigh that which, if she might have given Zima his answer, she would readily have avowed. After waiting a while, Zima found it strange that no answer was forthcoming, and he then began to perceive the trick which the knight had played him. However, he kept his eyes fixed on the lady, and, observing that her eyes glowed now and again as they met his, and noting the partially suppressed sighs which escaped her, he gathered a little hope, which gave him courage to try a novel plan of attack. So while the lady listened, he began to make answer for herself to himself on this wise: Zima, mine, true indeed it is that long since I discerned that thou didst love me with a love exceeding great and wholehearted, whereof I have now yet ampler assurance by thine own words, and well content I am therewith, as indeed I ought to be. And however harsh and cruel I may have seemed to thee, I would by no means have thee believe that I have been such a heart as I have seemed in aspect. Rather be assured that I have ever loved thee and held thee dear above all other men. The man which I have worn was but prescribed by fear of another, and solicitude for my fair frame. But a time will soon come when I shall be able to give thee plain proof of my love, and to accord the love which thou hast borne and dost bear me its due guerdon. Wherefore be comforted and of good hope, for Messer Francesco is to go in a few days' time to Milan as podesta, as thou well knowest, seeing that for love of me thou hast given him thy fine palfrey. and I vow to thee upon my faith, upon the true love which I bear thee, that without fail, within a few days thereafter, thou shalt be with me, and we will give our love complete and gladsome consummation. And that I may have no more occasion to speak to thee of this matter, be it understood between us that henceforth when thou shalt observe 2 towels disposed at the window of my room which overlooks the garden, thou shalt come to me after nightfall of that same day by the garden door, and look well to it that thou be not seen, and thou shalt find me waiting for thee, and we will have our fill of mutual cheer and solace all night long." Having thus answered for the lady, Zima resumed his own person, and thus replied to the lady: "Dearest madam, your boon response so overpowers my every faculty that scarce can I frame words to render you due thanks, and were I able to utter all I feel, time, however long, would fail me fully to thank you as I would fain and as I ought, wherefore I must even leave it to your sage judgment to divine that which I yearn in vain to put in words. Let this one word suffice, that as you bid me, so I shall not fail to do, and then having, perchance, firmer assurance of the great boon which you have granted me, I will do my best endeavour to thank you in terms the amplest that I may command. For the present there is no more to say, and so, dearest my lady, I commend you to God, and may He grant you your heart's content of joy and bliss." To all which the lady returned never a word, wherefore Zima rose and turned to rejoin the knight, who, seeing him on his feet, came towards him and said with a laugh, "How sayest thou? Have I faithfully kept my promise to thee?" "Not so, sir," replied Zima, "for by thy word I was to have spoken with thy wife, and by thy deed I have spoken to a statue of marble." Which remark was much relished by the knight, who, well as he had thought of his wife, thought now even better of her, and said, "So thy palfrey that was is now mine, out and out." "'Tis even so, sir," replied Zima, "but had I thought to have gotten such fruit as I have from this favor of yours, I would not have craved it, but would have let you have the palfrey as a free gift, and would to God I had done so, for as it is you have bought the palfrey and I have not sold him." This drew a laugh from the knight, who within a few days thereafter mounted the palfrey which he had gotten, and took the road for Milan, there to enter on his podestate. The lady, now mistress of herself, bethought her of Zima's words, and the love which he bore her, and for which he had parted with his palfrey, and observing that he frequently passed her house, said to herself, "What am I about? Why throw I my youth away? My husband is gone to Milan, and will not return for 6 months, and when can he ever restore them to me? When I am old? And besides, shall I ever find another such lover as Zima? I am quite by myself, there's none to fear. I know not why I take not my good time while I may. I shall not always have the like opportunity as at present, no one will ever know, and if I should get known, 'tis better to do and repent than to forbear and repent." Of which meditations the issue was that one day she set 2 towels in the window overlooking the garden, according to Zima's word, and Zima, having remarked them with much exultation, stole at nightfall alone to the door of the lady's garden, and finding it open, crossed to another door that led into the house, where he found the lady awaiting him. On sight of him she rose to meet him, and gave him the heartiest of welcomes. 100,000 times he embraced and kissed her as he followed her upstairs. Then without delay they hied them to bed, and knew love's furthest bourne. and so far was the first time from being in this case the last, that while the knight was at Milan, and indeed after his return, there were seasons, not a few, at which Zima resorted thither to the immense delight of both parties. End of Day 3, the 5th story.
The 6th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gesine. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 3, the 6th story. Ricciardo Monutolo loves the wife of Filippello Figinolfi, and knowing her to be jealous, makes her believe that his own wife is to meet Filippello at a bagnio on the ensuing day, whereby she is induced to go thither, where, thinking to have been with her husband, she discovers that she has tarried with Ricciardo.
When Elisa had quite done, the queen, after some commendation of Zima's sagacity, bade Fiammetta follow with the story, whereto Fiammetta, all smiles, responded,
Madam, with all my heart.
and thus began.
Richly though our city abounds, as in all things else, so also in instances to suit every topic, yet I am minded to journey some distance thence, and, like Elisa, to tell you something of what goes on in other parts of the world. Wherefore pass we to Naples, where you shall hear how one of these sanctified that show themselves so shy of love was by the subtlety of her lover brought to taste to the fruit before she had known the flowers of love, whereby at one and the same time you may derive from the past counsel of prudence for the future, and present delectation. In the very ancient city of Naples, which for loveliness has not its superior, or perhaps its equal, in Italy, there once lived a young man, renowned alike for noble blood and the splendor of his vast wealth, his name Ricciardo Monutolo. He was mated with a very fair and loving wife, but nevertheless he became enamored of a lady who in the general opinion vastly surpassed in beauty every other lady in Naples. Catella, such was the lady's name, was married to a young man, likewise of gentle blood, Filippello Figinolfi by name, whom she, most virtuous of ladies, loved and held dear above all else in the world. Being thus enamored of Catella, Ricciardo Monutolo left none of those means untried whereby a lady's favour and love are wont to be gained, but for all that he made no way towards the attainment of his heart's desire, whereby he fell into a sort of despair, and witless and powerless to lose himself from his love, found life scarce tolerable, and yet knew not how to die. While in this frame he languished, it befell one day that some ladies that were of kin to him counselled him earnestly to be quit of such a love, whereby he could but fret himself to no purpose, seeing that Catella cared for naught in the world except Filippello, and lived in such a state of jealousy on his account that never a bird flew but she feared lest it would snatch him from her. So soon as Ricciardo heard of Catella's jealousy, he forthwith began to ponder how he might make it subserve his end. He feigned to have given up his love for Catella as hopeless, and to have transferred it to another lady, in whose honour he accordingly began to tilt and joust, and do all that he had been wont to do in honour of Catella. Nor was it long before well nigh all the Neapolitans, including Catella herself, began to think that he had forgotten Catella, and was to the last degree enamoured of the other lady. In this course he persisted, until the opinion was so firmly rooted in the minds of all that even Catella laid aside a certain reserve which she had used towards him, while she deemed him her lover, and coming and going greeted him in friendly neighbourly fashion, like the rest. Now it so befell that during the hot season, when, according to the custom of Neapolitans, many companies of ladies and gentlemen went down to the sea-coast to recreate themselves, and breakfast and sup. Ricciardo, knowing that Catella was gone thither with her company, went likewise with his, but making as if he were not minded to stay there, he received several invitations from the ladies of Catella's company before he accepted any. When the ladies received him, they all with one accord, including Catella, began to rally him on his new love, and he furnished them with more matter for talk by feigning a most ardent passion. At length, most of the ladies being gone off, one hither, one thither, as they do in such places, leaving Catella and a few others with Ricciardo, he tossed at Catella a light allusion to a certain love of her husband Filippello, which threw her at once into such a fit of jealousy that she inly burned with a vehement desire to know what Ricciardo meant. For a while she kept her own counsel, then, brooking no more suspense, she adjured Ricciardo, by the love he bore the lady whom most he loved, to expound to her what he had said touching Filippello. He answered thus: "You have adjured me by her to whom I dare not deny aught that you may ask of me. My riddle, therefore, I will presently read you, provided you promise me that neither to him nor to any one else will you impart aught of what I shall relate to you, until you shall have ocular evidence of its truth, which, so you desire it, I will teach you how you may obtain." The lady accepted his terms, which rather confirmed her belief in his veracity, and swore that she would not tell a soul. They then drew a little apart, that they might not be overheard by the rest, and Ricciardo thus began: "Madam, did I love you as I once did, I should not dare to tell you aught that I thought might cause you pain, but now that that love is past, I shall have the less hesitation in telling you the truth. Whether Filippello ever resented the love which I bore you, or deemed that it was returned by you, I know not. Whether it were so or no, he certainly never showed any such feeling to me, but so it is that now, having waited, perhaps, until he supposes I am less likely to be on my guard, he shows a disposition to serve me, as I doubt he suspects that I served him. That is to say, he would fain have his pleasure with my wife, whom for some time past he has, as I discover, plied with messages through most secret channels. She has told me all, and has answered him according to my instructions, but only this morning, just before I came hither, I found a woman in close parley with her in the house, whose true character and purpose I forthwith divined, so I called my wife and asked her what the woman wanted. Whereto she answered, "'Tis this persecution by Filippello which thou hast brought upon me by the encouraging answers that thou wouldst have me give him. He now tells me that he is most earnestly desirous to know my intentions, and that, should I be so minded, he would contrive that I should have secret access to a bagnio in this city, and he is most urgent and instant that I should consent. And hadst thou not, wherefore I know not, bidden me keep the affair afoot, I would have dismissed him in such a sort that my movements would have been exempt from his prying observation forever." Upon this I saw that the affair was going too far. I determined to have no more of it, and to let you know it, that you may understand how he requites your whole-hearted faith, which brought me of late to the verge of death. And that you may not suppose that these are but empty words and idle tales, but may be able, should you so desire, to verify them by sight and touch, I caused my wife to tell the woman who still waited her answer that she would be at the bagnio tomorrow about noon, during the siesta. With which answer the woman went away well content. Now you do not, I suppose, imagine that I would send her thither, but if I were in your place, he should find me there instead of her whom he thinks to find there, and when I had been some little time with him, I would give him to understand with whom he had been, and he should have of me such honour as he deserved. Whereby I doubt not he would be put to such shame, as would at one and the same time avenge both the wrong which he has done to you, and that which he plots against me. Catella, as is the wont of the jealous, hearkened to Ricciardo's words, and, without so much as giving a thought to the speaker or his wiles, inclined at once to credit his story, and began to twist certain antecedent matters into accord with it. Then, suddenly kindling with wrath, she answered, that to the bagnio she would certainly go, 'twould cause her no great inconvenience, and if he should come she would so shame him that he should never again set eyes on woman but his ears would tingle. Satisfied by what he heard that his stratagem was well conceived, and success sure, Ricciardo added much in corroboration of his story, and having thus confirmed her belief in it, besought her to keep it always close, whereto she pledged her faith. Next morning Ricciardo hied him to the good woman that kept the bagnio, to which he had directed Catella, told her the enterprise which he had in hand, and prayed her to aid him therein so far as she might be able. The good woman, who was much beholden to him, assured him that she would gladly do so, and concerted with him all that was to be said and done. She had in the bagnio a room which was very dark, being without any window to admit the light. This room, by Ricciardo's direction, she set in order, and made up a bed there as well as she could, into which bed Ricciardo got, as soon as he had breakfasted, and there awaited Catella's coming. Now Catella, still giving more credence to Ricciardo's story than it merited, had gone home in the evening in a most resentful mood, and Filippello, returning home the same evening with a mind greatly preoccupied, was scarce as familiar with her as he was wont to be. Which she marking, grew yet more suspicious than before, and said to herself, doubtless he is thinking of the lady of whom he expects to take his pleasure tomorrow, as most assuredly he shall not. And so, musing and meditating what she should say to him after their encounter at the bagnio, she spent the best part of the night. But to shorten my story, upon the stroke of noon, Catella, taking with her a single attendant, but otherwise adhering to her original intention, hied her to the bagnio which Ricciardo had indicated, and finding the good woman there, asked her whether Filippello had been there that day. Prying by Ricciardo, the good woman asked her whether she were the lady that was to come to speak with him, to which she answered in the affirmative. Go to him then, said the good woman. And so Catella, in quest of that which she would gladly not have found, was shown to the chamber where Ricciardo was, and having entered without uncovering her head, closed the door behind her. Overjoyed to see her, Ricciardo sprang out of bed, took her in his arms, and said caressingly, "Welcome, my soul." Catella, dissembling, for she was minded at first to counterfeit another woman, returned his embrace, kissed him, and lavished endearments upon him, saying the while not a word, lest her speech should betray her. The darkness of the room, which was profound, was equally welcome to both, nor were they there long enough for their eyes to recover power. Ricciardo helped Catella on to the bed, where with no word said on either side, in a voice that might be recognized, they lay a long while, much more to the solace and satisfaction of the one than of the other party. Then Catella, deeming it high time to vent her harboured resentment, burst forth in a blaze of wrath on this wise. Alas, how wretched is the lot of women, how misplaced of not a few the love they bear their husbands! Ah, woe is me! For 8 years I have loved thee more dearly than my life, and now I find that thou, base miscreant that thou art, dost naught but burn and languish for love of another woman. Here thou hast been, with whom, thinkest thou? Even with her whom thou hast long deluded with thy false blandishments, making pretence to love her, while thou art enamoured of another. 'Tis I, Catella, not the wife of Ricciardo, false traitor that thou art. List if thou knowest my voice, 'tis I indeed. Ah, would we were but in the light! It seems to me 1,000 years till then, that I might shame thee as thou deservest, vile pestilent dog that thou art. Alas, woe is me! Such love as I have borne so many years. To whom? To this faithless dog, that, thinking to have a strange woman in his embrace, has in the brief while that I have been with him here lavished upon me more caresses and endearments than during all the forepast time that I have been his. A lively spark indeed art thou to-day, renegade dog, that showest thyself so limp and enervate and impotent at home. But God be praised, thou hast tilled thine own plot, and not another's, as thou didst believe. No wonder that last night thou heldest aloof from me. Thou wast thinking of scattering thy seed elsewhere, and wast minded to show thyself a lusty knight when thou shouldst join battle. But praise be to God and my sagacity, the water has nevertheless taken its proper course. Where is thy answer, culprit? Hast thou naught to say? Have my words struck thee dumb? God's faith! I know not why I forbear to pluck thine eyes out with my fingers. Thou thoughtest to perpetrate this treason with no small secrecy, but, by God, one is as knowing as another, thy plot has failed. I had better hounds on thy trail than thou didst think for. Ricciardo, inly delighted by her words, made no answer, but embraced and kissed her more than ever, and overwhelmed her with his endearments. So she continued her reproaches, saying, Ay, thou thinkest to cajole me with thy feigned caresses, wearisome dog that thou art, and so to pacify and mollify me, but thou art mistaken. I shall never be mollified until I have covered thee with infamy in the presence of all our kinsfolk and friends and neighbours. Am I not, miscreant, as fair as the wife of Ricciardo Monutolo? Am I not as good a lady as she? Why dost not answer, vile dog? Wherein has she the advantage of me? Away with thee, touch me not. Thou hast done feats of arms more than enough for to-day. Well I know that, now that thou knowest who I am, thou wilt wreak thy will on me by force. But by God's grace I will yet disappoint thee. I know not why I forbear to send for Ricciardo, who loved me more than himself, and yet was never able to boast that he had a single glance from me, nor know I why 'twere wrong to do so. Thou thoughtest to have his wife here, and 'tis no fault of thine that thou hadst her not. So if I had him, thou couldst not justly blame me. Enough had now been said. The lady's mortification was extreme, and as she ended, Ricciardo bethought him that, if he suffered her, thus deluded, to depart, much evil might ensue. He therefore resolved to make himself known, and disabuse her of her error. So, taking her in his arms, and clipping her so close that she could not get loose, he said, Sweet my soul, be not wroth. That which while artlessly I loved, I might not have, love has taught me to compass by guile. Know that I am thy Ricciardo. At these words, and the voice, which she recognized, Catella started, and would have sprung out of the bed, which being impossible, she essayed a cry, but Ricciardo laid a hand upon her mouth and closed it, saying, Madam, that which is done can never be undone, though you should cry out for the rest of your days, and should you in such or any other wise publish this matter to any, two consequences will ensue. In the first place, and this is a point which touches you very nearly, your honor and fair fame will be blasted, for however you may say that I lured you hither by guile, I shall deny it, and affirm, on the contrary, that I induced you to come hither by promises of money and gifts, and that 'tis but because you are vexed, that what I gave you did not altogether come up to your expectations, that you make such a cry and clamour. And you know that folk are more prone to believe evil than good, and therefore I am no less likely to believe than you. The further consequence will be mortal enmity between your husband and me, and the event were as like to be that I killed him as that he killed me, which if I did, you would never more know joy or peace. Wherefore, heart of my body, do not at one and the same time bring your dishonour upon yourself, and set your husband and me at strife and in jeopardy of our lives. You are not the first, nor will you be the last, to be beguiled, nor have I beguiled you to rob you of aught, but for excess of love that I bear, and shall ever bear you, being your most lowly vassal. And though it is now a great while that I, and what I have and can and am worth, are yours, yet I am minded that so it shall be henceforth more than ever before. Your discretion in other matters is not unknown to me, and I doubt not 'twill be equally manifest in this. Ricciardo's admonitions were received by Catella with many a bitter tear, but though she was very wroth and very sad at heart, yet Ricciardo's true words so far commanded the assent of her reason that she acknowledged that 'twas possible they might be verified by the event. Wherefore she made answer, Ricciardo, I know not how God will grant me patience to bear the villainy and knavery which thou hast practised upon me, and though in this place, to which simplicity and excess of jealousy guided my steps, I raise no cry, rest assured that I shall never be happy, until in one way or another I know myself avenged of that which thou hast done to me. Wherefore unhand me, let me go. Thou hast had the desire of me, and hast tormented me to thy heart's content. 'Tis time to release me, let me go, I pray thee. But Ricciardo, seeing that she was still much ruffled in spirit, was resolved not to let her go until he made his peace with her. So he addressed himself to soothe her, and by dint of most dulcet phrases, and entreaties and adjurations, he did at last prevail with her to give him her pardon. Nay, by joint consent they tarried there a great while, to the exceeding great delight of both. Indeed the lady, finding her lover's kisses smack much better than those of her husband, converted her asperity into sweetness, and from that day forth cherished a most tender love for Ricciardo, whereof, using all circumspection, they many a time had solace. God grant us solace of ours. End of Day 3, the 6th story.
Day 3, the 7th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 3, the 7th story. Tebaldo, being in disfavour with his lady, departs from Florence. He returns thither after a while in the guise of a pilgrim, has speech of his lady, and makes her sensible of her fault. Her husband, convicted of slaying him, he delivers from peril of death, reconciles him with his brothers, and thereafter discreetly enjoys his lady.
So ceased Fiammetta, and, when all had bestowed on her their meed of praise, the queen, to lose no time, forthwith bade Emilia resume the narration. So thus Emilia began.
I am minded to return to our city, whence my two last predecessors saw fit to depart, and to show you how one of our citizens recovered the lady he had lost. Know then that there was in Florence a young noble, his name Tebaldo Elisei, who, being beyond measure enamoured of a lady hight Monna Ermelina, wife of one Aldobrandino Palermini, and by reason of his admirable qualities richly deserving to have his desire, found fortune nevertheless adverse, as she is wont to be to the prosperous. Inasmuch as, for some reason or another, the lady, having shown herself gracious towards Tebaldo for a while, completely altered her mien, and not only showed him no further favour, but would not so much as receive a message from him, or suffer him to see her face, whereby he fell a prey to a grievous and distressful melancholy. But so well had he concealed his love, that the cause of his melancholy was surmised by none. He tried hard in divers ways to recover the love which he deemed himself to have lost for no fault of his, and finding all his efforts unavailing, he resolved to bid the world adieu, that he might not afford her who was the cause of his distress the satisfaction of seeing him languish. So he got together as much money as he might, and secretly, no word said to friend or kinsman except only a familiar gossip, who knew all, he took his departure for Ancona. Arrived there, he assumed the name of Filippo Santodecchio, and having foregathered with a rich merchant, entered his service. The merchant took him with him to Cyprus aboard one of his ships, and was so well pleased with his bearing and behaviour that he not only gave him a handsome salary, but made him in a sort his companion, and entrusted him with the management of no small part of his affairs, wherein he proved himself so apt and assiduous that in the course of a few years he was himself established in credit and wealth and great repute as a merchant. 7 years thus passed, during which, albeit his thoughts frequently reverted to his cruel mistress, and sorely love smote him, and much he yearned to see her again, yet such was his firmness that he came off conqueror, until one day in Cyprus it so befell that there was sung in his hearing a song that he had himself composed, and of which the theme was the mutual love that was between his lady and him, and the delight that he had of her; which as he heard, he found it incredible that she should have forgotten him, and burned with such a desire to see her once more that, being able to hold out no longer, he made up his mind to return to Florence. So, having set all his affairs in order, he betook him, attended only by a single servant, to Ancona, whence he sent all his effects as they arrived forward to Florence, consigning them to a friend of his encontent partner, and followed with his servant in the disguise of a pilgrim returned from the Holy Sepulchre. Arrived at Florence, he put up at a little hostelry kept by 2 brothers hard by his lady's house, whither he forthwith hied him, hoping that, perchance, he might have sight of her from the street. But, finding all barred and bolted, doors, windows, and all else, he doubted much she must be dead, or have removed thence. So, with a very heavy heart, he returned to the house of the 2 brothers, and to his great surprise found his own 4 brothers standing in front of it, all in black. He knew that he was so changed from his former semblance, both in dress and in person, that he might not readily be recognized, and he had therefore no hesitation in going up to a shoemaker and asking him why these men were all dressed in black. The shoemaker answered, "'Tis because 'tis not 15 days since a brother of theirs, Tedaldo by name, that had been long abroad, was slain, and I understand that they have proved in court that one Aldobrandino Palermini, who is under arrest, did the deed, because Tedaldo, who loved his wife, was come back to Florence incognito to foregather with her." Tedaldo found it passing strange that there should be anyone so like him as to be mistaken for him, and deplored Aldobrandino's evil plight. He had learned, however, that the lady was alive and well. So, as 'twas now night, he hied him, much perplexed in mind, into the inn, and supped with his servant. The bedroom assigned him was almost at the top of the house, and the bed was none of the best. Thoughts many and disquieting haunted his mind, and his supper had been but light. Whereby it befell that midnight came and went, and Tedaldo was still awake. As thus he watched, he heard shortly after midnight a noise as of persons descending from the roof into the house, and then through the chinks of the door of his room he caught the flicker of an ascending light. Wherefore he stole softly to the door, and peeping through a chink to make out what was afoot, he saw a very fine young woman bearing a light, and 3 men making towards her, being evidently those that had descended from the roof. The men exchanged friendly greetings with the young woman, and then one said to her, "Now, God be praised, we may make our minds easy, for we are well assured that judgment for the death of Tiraldo Elisei is gotten by his brothers against Aldobrandino Palermini, and he has confessed, and the sentence is already drawn up. But still it behoves us to hold our peace, for, should it ever get abroad that we were guilty, we shall stand in the like jeopardy as Aldobrandino." So saying, they took leave of the woman, who seemed much cheered, and went to bed. What he had heard set Tedaldo musing on the number and variety of the errors to which men are liable; as first how his brothers had mourned and interned a stranger in his stead, and then charged an innocent man upon false suspicion, and by false witness brought him into imminent peril of death; from which he passed to ponder the blind severity of laws and magistrates, who, from misguided zeal to elicit the truth, not unfrequently become ruthless, and, adjudging that which is false, forfeit the title which they claim of ministers of God and justice, and do but execute the mandates of iniquity and the evil one. And so he came at last to consider the possibility of saving Aldobrandino, and formed a plan for the purpose. Accordingly, on the morrow, when he was risen, he left his servant at the inn, and hied him alone, at what he deemed a convenient time, to his lady's house, where, finding by chance the door open, he entered and saw his lady sitting, all tears and lamentations, in a little parlour on the ground floor. Whereat he all but wept for sympathy, and drawing near her, he said, "Madam, be not troubled in spirit, your peace is nigh you." Whereupon the lady raised her head, and said between her sobs, "Good man, what dost thou, a pilgrim if I mistake not, from distant parts, know either of my peace or of my affliction?" "Madam," returned the pilgrim, "I am of Constantinople, and am but now come hither at God's behest, that I may give you laughter for tears, and deliver your husband from death." "But," said the lady, "if thou art of Constantinople, and but now arrived, how is it that thou knowest either who my husband is or who I am?" Whereupon the pilgrim gave her the whole narrative from the very beginning of Aldobrandino's sufferings. He also told her who she was, how long she had been married, and much besides that was known to him of her affairs. Whereat the lady was lost in wonder, and, taking him to be a prophet, threw herself on her knees at his feet, and besought him for God's sake, if he were come to save Aldobrandino, to lose no time, for the matter brooked no delay. Thus adjured, the pilgrim assumed an air of great sanctity as he said, "Arise, madam, weep not, but hearken diligently to what I shall say to you, and look to it that you impart it to none. I have it by revelation of God that the tribulation wherein you stand is come upon you in requital of a sin which you did once commit, of which God is minded that this suffering be a partial purgation, and that you make reparation in full if you would not find yourself in a far more grievous plight." "Sir," replied the lady, "many sins have I committed, nor know I how among them all to single out that whereof, more than another, God requires reparation at my hands. Wherefore, if you know it, tell it me, and what by way of reparation I may do, that will I do." "Madam," returned the pilgrim, "well wot I what it is, nor shall I question you thereof for my better instruction, but that the rehearsal may give you increase or remorse therefore. But pass we now to fact. Tell me, mind you ever to have had a lover?" Whereat the lady heaved a deep sigh. Then, marvelling not a little, for she had thought it was known to none, albeit on the day when the man was slain, who was afterwards buried as Tidaldo, there had been some buzz about it, occasioned by some indiscreet words dropped by Tidaldo's gossip and confidant, she made answer, "I see that there is naught that man keeps secret but God reveals it to you, wherefore I shall not endeavour to hide my secrets from you. True it is that in my youth I was beyond measure enamoured of the unfortunate young man whose death is imputed to my husband, whom I mourned with grief unfeigned, for, albeit I showed myself harsh and cruel towards him before his departure, yet neither thereby, nor by his long absence, nor yet by his calamitous death, was my heart estranged from him." Then said the pilgrim, "'Twas not the unfortunate young man now dead that you did love, but Tidaldo Elisei. But let that pass. Now tell me, wherefore lost he your good graces? Did he ever offend you?" "Nay, verily," answered the lady, "he never offended me at all. My harshness was prompted by an accursed friar, to whom I once confessed, and who, when I told him of the love I bore Tidaldo, and my intimacy with him, made my ears so tingle and sing that I still shudder to think of it, warning me that, if I gave it not up, I should fall into the jaws of the devil in the abyss of hell, and be cast into the avenging fire. Whereby I was so terrified that I quite made up my mind up to discontinue my intimacy with him, and, to trench the matter, I would thenceforth have none of his letters or messages. And so I suppose he went away in despair. Though I doubt not, had he persevered a while longer, I should not have seen him wasting away like snow in sunshine, without relenting of my harsh resolve. For, in sooth, there was nothing in the world I would so gladly have done." Then said the pilgrim, "Madam, 'tis this sin, and this only, that has brought upon you your present tribulation. I know positively that Tidaldo did never put force upon you. 'Twas of your own free will, and for that he pleased you, that you became enamoured of him. Your constant visitor, your intimate friend he became, because you yourself would have it so. And in the course of your intimacy you showed him such favour by word and deed that, if he loved you first, you multiplied his love full 1,000-fold. And if so it was, and well yourself from him, you should have considered the whole matter before the die was cast, and not have entered upon it, if you deemed he might have cause to repent you of it as a sin. As soon as he became yours, you became his. Had he not been yours, you might have acted as you had thought fit, at your own unfettered discretion. But as you were his, 'twas robbery, 'twas conduct most disgraceful, to sever yourself from him against his will. Now you must know that I am a friar, and therefore all the ways of friars are familiar to me. Nor does it misbecome me, as it might another, to speak for your behoof somewhat freely of them, as I am minded to do, that you may have better understanding of them in the future than you would seem to have had in the past. Time was when the friars were most holy and worthy men, but those who today take the name and claim the reputation of friars have naught of the friar save only the habit. Nay, they have not even that, for whereas their founders ordained that their habits should be straight, of a sorry sort, and of coarse stuff, apt symbols of a soul that in arraying the body in so mean a garb did despite to all things temporal, our modern friars will have them full, and double, and resplendent, and of the finest stuff, and of a fashion goodly and pontifical, wherein without shame they flaunt it like peacocks in the church, in the piazza, even as do the laity in their robes. And as the fisherman casts his net into the stream with intent to take many fish at one throw, so it is the main solicitude and study, art and craft of these friars to embrace and entangle within the ample folds of their vast swelling skirts beguines, widows, and other foolish women, ay, and men likewise in great number. Wherefore, to speak with more exactitude, the friars of today have naught of the habit of the friar, save only the colour thereof. And whereas the friars of old time sought to win men to their salvation, those of today seek to win their women and their wealth. Wherefore they have made it and make it their sole concern by declamation and imagery to strike terror into the souls of fools, and to make believe that sins are purged by alms and masses, to the end that they, base wretches that have fled to friarage not to ensue holiness but to escape hardship, may receive from this man bread, from that man wine, and from the other man a donation for masses for the souls of his dead. True indeed it is that sins are purged by almsgiving and prayer, but did they who give the alms know, did they but understand to whom, or throw them to so many pigs? And knowing that the fewer be they that share great riches, the greater their ease, 'tis the study of each how best by declamation and intimidation to oust others from that whereof he would fain be the sole owner. They censure a lust in men, that they turning therefrom, the sole use of their women may remain to the censors. They condemn usury and unlawful gains, that, being entrusted with the restitution thereof, they may be able to enlarge their habits, and to purchase bishoprics and other great preferments with the very money which they have made believe must bring its possessor to perdition. And when they are taxed with these and many other discreditable practices, they deem that there is no censure, however grave, of which they may not be quit by their glib formula, "Follow our precepts, not our practice," as if it were possible that the sheep should be of a more austere and rigid virtue than the shepherds. And how many of these, whom they put off with this formula, understand it not in the way in which they enunciate it, not a few of them know. The friars of today would have you follow their precepts, that is to say, they would have you fill their purses with coin, confide to them your secrets, practice continence, be long-suffering, forgive those that trespass against you, keep yourselves from evil speaking, all which things are good, seemly, holy. But to what end? To the end that they may be able to do that which, if the laity do it, they will not be able to do. Who knows not that idleness cannot subsist without money? Spend thy money on thy pleasures, and the friar will not be able to live in sloth in his order. Go after women, and there will be no place for the friar. Be not long-suffering, pardon not the wrongdoer, and the friar will not dare to cross thy threshold to corrupt thy family. But wherefore pursue I the topic through every detail? They accuse themselves as often as they so excuse themselves in the hearing of all that have understanding. Why seclude they not themselves, if they misdoubt their power to lead continent and holy lives? Or, if they must needs not live as recluses, why follow they not that other holy text of the gospel, Christ began to do and to teach? Let them practice first, and school us with their precepts afterwards. 1,000 such have I seen in my day, admirers, lovers, philanderers, not of ladies of the world alone, but of nuns, ay, and they too such as made the most noise in the pulpit. Is it such as they that we are to follow? He that does so pleases himself, but God knows if he do wisely. But assume that herein we must allow that your censor, the friar, spoke truth, to wit, that none may break the marriage vow without very grave sin. What then? to rob a man, to slay him, to make of him an exile and a wanderer on the face of the earth, are not these yet greater sins? None will deny that so they are. A woman that indulges herself in the intimate use with a man commits but a sin of nature, but if she rob him, or slay him, or drive him out into exile, her sin proceeds from depravity of spirit. That you did rob Tidaldo, I have already shown you, in that, having of your own free will become his, you reft you from him. I now go further and say that, so far as in you lay, you slew him, seeing that, showing yourself ever more and more cruel, you did your utmost to drive him to take his own life, and in the law's intent he that is the cause that wrong is done is as culpable as he that does it. Nor is it deniable that you were the cause that for 7 years he has been an exile and a wanderer upon the face of the earth. Wherefore upon each of the said 3 articles you are found guilty of a greater crime than you committed by your intimacy with him. But consider we the matter more closely. Perchance Tidaldo merited such treatment. Nay, but assuredly it was not so. You have yourself so confessed. Besides which, I know that he loves you more dearly than himself. He would laud, he would extol, he would magnify you above all other ladies, so as never was heard the like, wheresoever 'twas seemly for him to speak of you, and it might be done without exciting suspicion. All his bliss, all his honour, all his liberty he avowed was entirely in your disposal. Was he not of noble birth? And for beauty might he not compare with the rest of his townsfolk? Did he not excel in all the exercises and accomplishments proper to youth? Was he not beloved, held dear, well seen of all men? You will not deny it. How then could you, at the behest of a paltry friar, silly, brutish, and envious, bring yourself to deal with him in any harsh sort? I cannot estimate the error of those ladies who look askance on men and hold them cheap; whereas, bethinking them of what they are themselves, and what and how great is the nobility with which God has endowed man above all the other animals, they ought rather to glory in the love which men give them, and hold them most dear, and with all zeal study to please them, that so their love may never fail. In what sort you did so, instigated by the chatter of a friar, some broth-guzzling, pastry-gorging knave without a doubt, you know, and peradventure his purpose was but to install himself in the place whence he sought to oust another. This then is the sin which the divine justice, which, ever operative, suffers no perturbation of its even balance, or arrest of judgment, has decreed not to leave unpunished. Wherefore, as without due cause you devised how you might despoil Tidaldo of yourself, so without due cause your husband has been placed, and is in jeopardy of his life, on Tidaldo's account, and to your sore affliction. Wherefrom, if you would be delivered, there is that which you must promise, ay, and, much more, which you must perform. To wit, that, should it ever betide that Tidaldo return hither from his long exile, you will restore him your favour, your love, your tender regard, your intimacy, and reinstate him in the position which he held before you foolishly hearkened to the half-witted friar. Thus ended the pilgrim, and the lady, who had followed him with the closest attention, deeming all that he advanced very sound, and doubting not that her tribulation was, as he said, in requital of her sin, spoke thus: "Friend of God, well I wot that the matters which you discourse are true, and, thanks to your delineation, I now in great measure know what manner of men are the friars, whom I have hitherto regarded as all alike holy, nor doubt I that great was my fault in the course which I pursued towards Tidaldo. And gladly, were it in my power, would I make reparation in the manner which you have indicated. But how is this feasible? Tidaldo can never return to us. He is dead. Wherefore I know not why I must needs give you a promise which cannot be performed." "Madam," returned the pilgrim, "'tis revealed to me by God that Tidaldo is by no means dead, but alive and well and happy, so only he enjoyed your favour." "Nay, but," said the lady, "speak advisedly. I saw his body done to death by more than one knife wound. I folded it in these arms, and drenched the dead face with many a tear, whereby perchance I gave occasion for the bruit that has been made to my disadvantage." "Say what you may, madam," rejoined the pilgrim, I assure you that Tebaldo lives, and if you will but give the promise, then, for its fulfilment, I have good hope that you will soon see him." Whereupon, "I give the promise," said the lady, "and right gladly will I make it good, nor is there aught that might happen that would yield me such delight as to see my husband free and scathless and Tebaldo alive." Tebaldo now deemed it wise to make himself known, and establish the lady in a more sure hope of her husband's safety. Wherefore he said, "Madam, to set your mind at ease in regard of your husband, I must first impart to you a secret, which be mindful to disclose to none so long as you live." Then, for such was the confidence which the lady reposed in the pilgrim's apparent sanctity, that they were by themselves in a place remote from observation, Tebaldo drew forth a ring which he had guarded with the most jealous care, since it had been given him by the lady on the last night when they were together, and said as he showed it to her, "Madam, know you this?" The lady recognized it forthwith, and answered, "I do, sir. I gave it long ago to Tebaldo." Then the pilgrim, rising and throwing off his sclavine and hat, said with a Florentine accent, "And know you me?" The lady, recognizing forthwith the form and semblance of Tebaldo, was struck dumb with wonder and fear as of a corpse that is seen to go about as if alive, and was much rather disposed to turn and flee from Tebaldo returned from the tomb than to come forward and welcome Tebaldo arrived from Cyprus. But when Tebaldo said to her, "Fear not, madam, your Tebaldo am I, alive and well, nor was I ever dead, whatever you and my brothers may think," the lady, partly awed, partly reassured by his voice, regarded him with rather more attention, and inly affirming that 'twas in very truth Tebaldo, threw herself upon his neck and wept and kissed him, saying, "Sweet my Tebaldo, welcome home." "Madam," replied Tebaldo, after he had kissed and embraced her, "time serves not now for greetings more intimate. 'Tis for me to be up and doing, that Aldobrandino may be restored to you safe and sound; touching which matter you will, I trust, before tomorrow at even hear tidings that will gladden your heart. Indeed I expect to have good news tonight, and if so, will come and tell it you, when I shall be less straitened than I am at present." He then resumed his sclavine and hat, and having kissed the lady again, and bade her be of good cheer, took his leave, and hied him to the prison, where Aldobrandino lay more occupied with apprehension of imminent death than hope of deliverance to come. As ministrant of consolation he gained ready admittance of the warders, and, seating himself by Aldobrandino's side, he said, "Aldobrandino, in me thou seest a friend sent thee by God, who is touched with pity of thee by reason of thy innocence. Wherefore, if in reverent submission to him thou wilt grant me a slight favour that I shall ask of thee, without fail before tomorrow at even thou shalt, in lieu of the doom of death that thou awaitest, hear thy acquittal pronounced." "Worthy man," replied Aldobrandino, "I know thee not, nor mind I ever to have seen thee. Wherefore, as thou showest thyself solicitous for my safety, my friend indeed thou must needs be, even as thou sayest. And in sooth the crime for which they say I ought to be doomed to death I never committed, though others enough I have committed, which perchance have brought me to this extremity. However, if so be that God has now pity on me, this I tell thee in reverent submission to him, that, whereas 'tis but a little thing that thou cravest of me, there is naught, however great, but I would not only promise but gladly do it. Wherefore, even ask what thou wilt, and if so be that I escape, I will without fail keep my word to the letter." "Nay," returned the pilgrim, "I ask but this of thee, that thou pardon Tebaldo's 4 brothers, that in the belief that thou wast guilty of their brother's death they brought thee to this strait, and, so they ask thy forgiveness, account them as thy brothers and friends." "How sweet," replied Aldobrandino, "is the savour, how ardent the desire, of vengeance, none knows but he that is wronged; but yet, so God may take thought for my deliverance, I will gladly pardon, nay, I do now pardon them, and if I go hence alive and free, I will thenceforth have them in such regard as shall content thee." Satisfied with this answer, the pilgrim, without further parley, heartily exhorted Aldobrandino to be of good cheer, assuring him that, before the next day was done, he should be certified beyond all manner of doubt of his deliverance. And so he left him. On quitting the prison, the pilgrim hied him forthwith to the Signory, and being closeted with the knight that was in charge, thus spoke: "My lord, 'tis the duty of all, and most especially of those who hold your place, zealously to bestir themselves that the truth be brought to light, in order as well that those bear not the penalty who have not committed the crime, as that the guilty be punished. And that this may come to pass to your honour and the undoing of the delinquent, I am come hither to you. You wot that you have dealt rigorously with Aldobrandino Palermini, and have found, as you think, that 'twas he that slew Tebaldo Elisei, and you are about to condemn him; wherein you are most certainly in error, as I doubt not before midnight to prove to you, delivering the murderers into your hands." The worthy knight, who was not without pity for Aldobrandino, readily gave ear to the pilgrim's words. He conversed at large with him, and availing himself of his guidance, made an easy capture of the two brothers that kept the inn and their servant in their first sleep. He was about to put them to the torture to elicit the true state of the case, when, their courage failing, they confessed without the least reserve, severally at first and then jointly, that 'twas they that had slain Tebaldo Elisei, not knowing who he was. Asked for why, they answered that 'twas because he had sorely harassed the wife of one of them, and would have constrained her to do his pleasure while they were out of doors. Whereof the pilgrim was no sooner apprized than by leave of the knight he withdrew, and hied him privily to the house of Madonna Ermelina, whom, the rest of the household being gone to bed, he found awaiting him alone, and equally anxious for good news of her husband and a complete reconciliation with her Tebaldo. On entering, he blithely exclaimed, "Rejoice, dearest my lady, for thou mayst rest assured that tomorrow thou shalt have thy Aldobrandino back here safe and sound." And to confirm her faith in his words, he told her all that he had done. Greater joy was never woman's than hers of two such glad surprises, to wit, to have Tebaldo with her alive again, whom she had wailed for verily dead, and to know Aldobrandino, whom she had thought in no long time to wail for dead, now out of jeopardy. Wherefore, when she had affectionately embraced and kissed her Tebaldo, they hied them to bed together, and with hearty good will made gracious and gladsome consummation of their peace by interchange of sweet solace. With the approach of day, Tebaldo rose, and having first apprized the lady of his purpose and enjoined her, as before, to keep it most secret, resumed his pilgrim's habit and sallied forth of her house, to be ready, as occasion should serve, to act in Aldobrandino's interest. As soon as 'twas day, the Signory, deeming themselves amply conversant with the affair, set Aldobrandino at large, and a few days later they caused the malefactors to be beheaded in the place where they had done the murder. Great was Aldobrandino's joy to find himself free, nor less great was that of his lady and all his friends and kinsfolk, and as 'twas through the pilgrim that it had come about, they brought him to their house, there to reside as long as he cared to tarry in the city, nor could they do him honour and cheer enough, and most of all the lady, who knew her man. But after a while, seeing that his brothers were not only become a common laughing-stock by reason of Aldobrandino's acquittal, but had armed themselves for very fear, he felt that their reconciliation with him brooked no delay, and accordingly craved of him performance of his promise. Aldobrandino replied handsomely that it should be had at once. The pilgrim then bade him arrange for the following day a grand banquet, at which he and his kinsfolk and their ladies were to entertain the four brothers and their ladies, adding that he would himself go forthwith as Aldobrandino's envoy and bid them welcome to his peace and banquet. All which being approved by Aldobrandino, the pilgrim hied him with all speed to the four brothers, whom by ample, apt, and unanswerable argument he readily induced to reinstate themselves in Aldobrandino's friendship by suing for his forgiveness. Which done, he bade them and their ladies to breakfast with Aldobrandino on the morrow, and they, being assured of his good faith, were consenting to come. So on the morrow, at the breakfast hour, Tebaldo's four brothers, still wearing their black, came with certain of their friends to Aldobrandino's house, where he awaited them. and in presence of the company that had been bidden to meet them, laid down their arms and made surrender to Aldobrandino, asking his pardon of that which they had done against him. Aldobrandino received them compassionately, wept, kissed each on the mouth, and let few words suffice to remit each offence. After them came their sisters and their wives, all habited sadly, and were graciously received by Madonna Ermelina and the other ladies. The guests, men and women alike, found all things ordered at the banquet with magnificence, nor aught unmeet for commendation, save the restraint which the yet recent grief, betokened by the sombre garb of Tidaldo's kinsfolk, laid upon speech, wherein some had found matter to except against the banquet and the pilgrim for devising it, as he well knew. But, as he had premeditated, in due time he stood up, the others being occupied with their dessert, and spoke thus: "Nothing is wanting to complete the gaiety of this banquet except the presence of Tidaldo, whom, as you have been long time with him and have not known him, I will point out to you." So, having divested himself of his sclavine and whatever else in his garb denoted the pilgrim, he remained habited in a tunic of green taffeta, in which guise so great was the wonder with which all regarded him that, though they recognized him, 'twas long before any dared to believe that 'twas actually Tidaldo. Marking their surprise, Tidaldo told them not a little about themselves, their family connections, their recent history, and his own adventures. Whereat his brothers and the rest of the men, all weeping for joy, hasted to embrace him, followed by the women, as well those that were not as those that were of kin to him, save only Madonna Ermelina. Which Aldobrandino observing, said, "What is this, Ermelina? How comes it that, unlike the other ladies, thou alone dost Tidaldo no cheer?" "Cheer," replied the lady in the hearing of all, "would I gladly do him such as no other woman has done or could do, seeing that I am more beholden to him than any other woman, in that to him I owe it that I have thee with me again. 'Tis but the words spoken to my disadvantage, while we mourned him that we deemed Tidaldo, that give me pause." "Now out upon thee," said Aldobrandino. "Think'st thou that I heed the yelping of these curs? His zeal for my deliverance has abundantly disproved it, besides which I never believed it. Quick, get thee up, and go and embrace him." The lady, who desired nothing better, was in this not slow to obey her husband. She rose forthwith, and embraced Tidaldo as the other ladies had done, and did him gladsome cheer. Tidaldo's brothers and all the company, men and women alike, heartily approved Aldobrandino's handsomeness, and so whatever of despite the rumour had engendered in the minds of any was done away. And now that all had done him cheer, Tidaldo with his own hands rent his brothers' suits of black upon their backs, as also the sad-hued garments which his sisters and sisters-in-law wore, and bade bring other apparel. Which when they had donned, there was no lack of singing, dancing, and other sorts of merrymaking, whereby the banquet, for all its subdued beginning, had a sonorous close. Then, just as they were, in the blithest of spirits, they hied them all to Tidaldo's house, where in the evening they supped, and in this manner they held festival for several days. 'Twas some time before the Florentines ceased to look on Tidaldo as a portent, as if he were risen from the dead, and the shadow of doubt whether he were really Tidaldo or no continued to lurk in the minds of not a few, including even his brothers. They had no assured belief, and in that frame had perchance long continued, but for a casual occurrence that showed them who the murdered man was. It so befell that one day some men-at-arms from Lunigiana passed by their house, and seeing Tidaldo, accosted him, saying, "Good morrow to thee, fagiolo." To whom Tidaldo, in the presence of his brothers, answered, "You take me for another." Whereat they were abashed, and asked his pardon, saying, "Sooth to tell, you are liker than we ever knew any man like to another, to a comrade of ours, Fasuolo da Pontremoli by name, who came hither a fortnight ago, or perhaps a little more, since when we have not been able to learn what became of him. Most true it is that your dress surprised us, because he, like ourselves, was a soldier." Whereupon Tidaldo's eldest brother came forward, and asked how their comrade had been accoutred. They told him, and 'twas found to have been exactly as they said, by which and other evidence 'twas established that 'twas Fasuolo that had been murdered, and not Tidaldo, of whom thenceforth no suspicion lurked in the minds of his brothers or any one else. So, then, Tebaldo returned home very rich, and remained constant in his love, nor did the lady again treat him harshly, but, using discretion, they long had mutual solace of their love. God grant us solace of ours. End of Day 3, the 7th story.
The 8th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Philippa Jevons. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 3, the 8th story. Ferrando, having taken a certain powder, is interred for dead, is disinterred by the abbot, who enjoys his wife, is put in prison and taught to believe that he is in purgatory, is then resuscitated, and rears as his own a boy begotten by the abbot upon his wife.
Ended Emilia's long story, which to none was the less pleasing for its length, but was deemed of all the ladies brief in regard of the number and variety of the events therein recounted. A gesture of the queen's sufficed to convey her behest to Lauretta, and cause her thus to begin.
Dearest ladies, I have it in mind to tell you a true story, which wears far more of the aspect of a lie than of that which it really was. 'Tis brought to my recollection by that which we have heard of one being bewailed and buried in lieu of another. My story, then, is of one that, living, was buried for dead, and after believed with many others that he came out of the tomb, not as one that had not died, but as one risen from the dead, whereby he was venerated as a saint, who ought rather to have been condemned as a criminal. Know then that there was, and still is, in Tuscany, an abbey, situate, as we see not a few, in a somewhat solitary spot, wherein the office of abbot was held by a monk, who in all other matters ordered his life with great sanctity, save only in the commerce with women, and therein knew so well how to cloak his indulgence, that scarce any there were that so much as suspected, not to say detected it, so holy and just was he reputed in all matters. Now the abbot consorted much with a very wealthy contadino, Ferrando by name, a man coarse and gross beyond measure, whose friendship the abbot only cared for, because of the opportunities which it afforded of deriving amusement from his simplicity; and during their intercourse the abbot discovered that Ferrando had a most beautiful wife, of whom he became so hotly enamoured that he could think of naught else either by day or by night. But learning that, however simple and inept in all other matters, Ferrando showed excellent good sense in cherishing and watching over this wife of his, he almost despaired. However, being very astute, he prevailed so far with Ferrando that he would sometimes bring his wife with him to take a little recreation in the abbey garden, where he discoursed to them with all lowliness of the blessedness of life eternal, and the most pious works of many men and women of times past, insomuch that the lady conceived a desire to confess to him, and craved and had Ferrando's leave therefore. So, to the abbot's boundless delight, the lady came and seated herself at his feet to make her confession, whereto she prefixed the following exordium: "If God, sir, had given me a husband, or had not permitted me to have one, perchance 'twould be easy for me under your guidance to enter the way of which you have spoken, that leads to life eternal. But considering what manner of man Ferrando is, and his stupidity, I may call myself a widow while yet I am married, in that so long as he lives I may have no other husband, and he, fool that he is without the least cause so inordinately jealous of me, that 'tis not possible but that my life with him be one of perpetual tribulation and woe. Wherefore, before I address myself to make further confession, I in all humility beseech you to be pleased to give me some counsel of this matter, for here or nowhere is to be found the source of the amelioration of my life, and if it be not found, neither confession nor any other good work will be of any avail." The abbot was overjoyed to hear her thus speak, deeming that fortune had opened a way to the fulfilment of his heart's desire. Wherefore he said, "My daughter, I doubt not that 'tis a great affliction to a lady, fair and delicate as you are, to have a fool for a husband, and still more so that he should be jealous; and as your husband is both the one and the other, I readily credit what you say of your tribulation. But, to come to the point, I see no resource or remedy in this case, save only this, that Ferrando be cured of his jealousy. The medicine that shall cure him I know very well how to devise, but it behoves you to keep secret what I am about to tell you." "Doubt not of it, my father," said the lady, "for I had rather suffer death than tell any aught that you forbade me to tell. But the medicine, how is it to be devised?" "If we would have him cured," replied the abbot, "it can only be by his going to purgatory." "And how may that be?" returned the lady. "Can he go thither while he yet lives?" "He must die," answered the abbot, "and so he will go thither; and when he has suffered pain enough to be cured of his jealousy, we have certain prayers with which we will supplicate God to restore him to life, and he will do so." "Then," said the lady, "am I to remain a widow?" "Yes," replied the abbot, "for a certain time, during which you must be very careful not to let yourself be married to another, because 'twould offend God, and when Ferrando was restored to life, you would have to go back to him, and he would be more jealous than ever." "Be it so then," said the lady; "if he be but cured of his jealousy, and so I be not doomed to pass the rest of my days in prison, I shall be content. Do as ye think best." "And so will I," said the abbot. "But what reward shall I have for such a service?" "My father," said the lady, "what you please, so only it be in my power. But what may the like of me do that may be acceptable to a man such as you?" "Madam," replied the abbot, "'tis in your power to do no less for me than I am about to do for you. As that which I am minded to do will ensure your comfort and consolation, so there is that which you may do which will be the deliverance and salvation of my life." "If it be so," said the lady, "I shall not be found wanting." "In that case," said the abbot, "you will give me your love, and gratify my passion for you, with which I am all afire, and wasting away." Whereto the lady, all consternation, replied, "Alas! my father, what is this you crave? I took you for a holy man. Now does it beseem holy men to make such overtures to ladies that come to them for counsel?" "Marvel not, fair my soul," returned the abbot; "hereby is my holiness in no wise diminished, for holiness resides in the soul, and this which I ask of you is but a sin of the flesh. But however it may be, such is the might of your bewitching beauty, that love constrains me thus to act. And let me tell you, good cause have you to vaunt you of your beauty more than other women, in that it delights the saints, who are used to contemplate celestial beauties. Whereto I may add, that, albeit I am an abbot, yet I am a man, even as others, and, as you see, not yet old. Nor need this matter seem formidable to you, but rather to be anticipated with pleasure. For while Ferrando is in purgatory, I shall be your nightly companion, and will give you such solace as he should have given you. Nor will it ever be discovered by any, for all think of me, even as you did a while ago, or even more so. Reject not the grace that God accords you, for 'tis in your power to have; and, if you are wise and follow my advice, you shall have that which women not a few desire in vain to have. And moreover I have jewels fair and rare, which I am minded shall be yours and none other's. Wherefore, sweet my hope, deny me not due guerdon of the service which I gladly render you." The lady, her eyes still downcast, knew not how to deny him, and yet scrupled to gratify him. Wherefore the abbot, seeing that she had hearkened and hesitated to answer, deemed that she was already half won, and following up what he had said with much more to the like effect, did not rest until he had persuaded her that she would do well to comply; and so with some confusion she told him that she was ready to obey his every behest, but it might not be until Ferrando was in purgatory. The abbot, well content, replied, "And we will send him thither forthwith. Do but arrange that he come hither to stay with me to morrow or the day after." Which said, he slipped a most beautiful ring on her finger, and dismissed her. Pleased with the gift, and expecting more to come, the lady rejoined her attendants, with whom she forthwith fell a talking marvellous things of the abbot's sanctity, and so went home with them. Some few days after, Ferrando being come to the abbey, the abbot no sooner saw him than he resolved to send him to purgatory. So he selected from among his drugs a powder of marvellous virtue, which he had gotten in the Levant from a great prince, who averred that 'twas wont to be used by the old man of the mountain, when he would send any one to or bring him from his paradise; and that, without doing the recipient any harm, 'twould induce in him, according to the quantity of the dose, a sleep of such duration and quality, that, while the efficacy of the powder lasted, none would deem him to be alive. Whereof he took enough to cause a 3 days' sleep, and gave it to Ferrando in his cell, in a beaker that had still some wine in it, so that he drank it unwittingly. After which he took Ferrando to the cloister, and there with some of his monks fell to making merry with him and his ineptitudes. In no long time, however, the powder so wrought, that Ferrando was seized in the head with a fit of somnolence so sudden and violent, that he slept as he stood, and sleeping fell to the ground. The abbot put on an agitated air, caused him to be untrussed, sent for cold water and had it sprinkled on his face, and applied such other remedies as if he would fain call back life and sense banished by vapours of the stomach or some other intrusive force. But as, for all that he and his monks did, Ferrando did not revive, they, after feeling his pulse and finding there no sign of life, one and all pronounced him certainly dead. Wherefore they sent word to his wife and kinsfolk, who came forthwith and mourned a while; after which Ferrando in his clothes was by the abbot's order laid in a tomb. The lady went home, saying that nothing should ever part her from a little son that she had borne Ferrando, and so she occupied herself with the care of her son and Ferrando's estate. At night the abbot rose noiselessly, and with the help of a Bolognese monk, in whom he reposed much trust, and who was that very day arrived from Bologna, got Ferrando out of the tomb, and bore him to a vault which admitted no light, having been made to serve as a prison for delinquent monks; and having stripped him of his clothes, and habited him as a monk, they laid him on a truss of straw, and left him there until he should revive. Expecting which event, and instructed by the abbot how he was then to act, the Bolognese monk, none else knowing aught of what was afoot, kept watch by the tomb. The day after, the abbot, with some of his monks, paid a pastoral visit to the lady's house, where he found her in mourning weeds, and sad at heart; and after administering a little consolation, he gently asked her to redeem her promise. Free as she now felt herself, and hampered neither by Ferrando nor by any other, the lady, who had noticed another beautiful ring on the abbot's finger, promised immediate compliance, and arranged with the abbot that he should visit her the very next night. So at nightfall the abbot donned Ferrando's clothes, and, attended by his monk, paid his visit, and lay with her until matins, to his immense delight and solace, and so returned to the abbey; and many visits he paid her on the same errand, whereby some that met him, coming or going that way, supposed that 'twas Ferrando perambulating those parts by way of penance; and fables not a few passed from mouth to mouth of the foolish rustics, and sometimes reached the ears of the lady, who was at no loss to account for them. As for Ferrando, when he revived, 'twas only to find himself he knew not where, while the Bolognese monk entered the tomb, gibbering horribly, and armed with a rod, wherewith, having laid hold of Ferrando, he gave him a severe thrashing. Blubbering and bellowing for pain, Ferrando could only ejaculate, "Where am I?" "In purgatory," replied the monk. "How?" returned Ferrando. "Am Am I dead, then? And the monk assuring him that 'twas even so, he fell a bewailing his own and his lady's and his son's fate after the most ridiculous fashion in the world. The monk brought him somewhat to eat and drink, of which when Ferrando caught sight, "Oh," said he, "dead folk eat, then, do they?" "They do," replied the monk, "and this which I bring thee is what the lady that was thy wife sent this morning to the church by way of alms for masses for thy soul, and God is minded that it be assigned to thee." "Now, God grant her a happy year," said Ferrando. "Dearly I loved her while I yet lived, and would hold her all night long in my arms, and cease not to kiss her, ay, and would do yet more to her when I was so minded." Whereupon he fell to eating and drinking with great avidity, and finding the wine not much to his taste, he said, "Now, God do her a mischief! Why gave she not the priest of the wine that is in the cask by the wall?" When he had done eating, the monk laid hold of him again, and gave him another sound thrashing with the rod. Ferrando bellowed mightily, and then cried out, "Alas! why servest thou me so?" "God," answered the monk, "has decreed that thou be so served twice a day." "For why?" said Ferrando. "Because," returned the monk, "thou wast jealous, notwithstanding thou hadst to wife a woman that has not her peer in thy countryside." "Alas!" said Ferrando, "she was indeed all that thou sayest. Ay, and the sweetest creature too, no comfit so honeyed. But I knew not that God took it amiss that a man should be jealous, or I had not been so." "Of that," replied the monk, "thou shouldst have bethought thee while thou wast there, and have amended thy ways, and should it fall to thy lot ever to return thither, be sure that thou so lay to heart the lesson that I now give thee, that thou be no more jealous." "Oh," said Ferrando, "dead folk sometimes return to earth, do they?" "They do," replied the monk, "if God so will." "Oh," said Ferrando, "if I ever return, I will be the best husband in the world. Never will I beat her or scold her, save for the wine that she has sent me this morning, and also for sending me never a candle, so that I have had perforce to eat in the dark." "Nay," said the monk, "she sent them, but they were burned at the masses." "Oh," said Ferrando, "I doubt not you say true, and of a surety, if I ever return, I will let her do just as she likes. But tell me, who art thou that entreatest me thus?" "Late of Sardinia, I," answered the monk, "dead too, and for that I gave my lord much countenance in his jealousy, doomed by God for my proper penance to entreat thee thus with food and drink and thrashings, until such time as he may ordain otherwise, touching thee and me." "And are we two the only folk here?" inquired Ferrando. "Nay, there are thousands beside," answered the monk, "but thou canst neither see nor hear them, nor they thee." "And how far," said Ferrando, "may we be from our country?" "Oho," returned the monk, "why, 'tis some miles clean out of shit range." "I'faith," said Ferrando, "that is far indeed. Methinks we must be out of the world." In such a course, alternately beaten, fed, and amused with idle tales, was Ferrando kept for 10 months, while the abbot, to his great felicity, paid many a visit to the fair lady, and had the jolliest time in the world with her. But, as misfortunes will happen, the lady conceived, which fact, as soon as she was aware of it, she imparted to the abbot, whereupon both agreed that Ferrando must without delay be brought back from purgatory to earth and her, and be given to understand that she was with child of him. So the very next night the abbot went to the prison, and in a disguised voice pronounced Ferrando's name, and said to him, "Ferrando, be of good cheer, for God is minded that thou return to earth, and on thy return thou shalt have a son by thy lady, and thou shalt call him Benedetto, because 'tis in answer to the prayers of thy holy abbot and thy lady, and for love of Saint Benedict, that God accords thee this grace. Whereat Ferrando was overjoyed, and said, It likes me well. God give a good year to Master Lord God, and the abbot, and St. Benedict, and my cheese-powdered, honey-sweet wife. Then, in the wine that he sent him, the abbot administered enough of the powder to cause him to sleep for 4 hours, and so, with the aid of the monk, having first habited him in his proper clothes, he privily conveyed him back to the tomb in which he had been buried. On the morrow at daybreak Ferrando revived, and perceiving through a chink in the tomb a glimmer of light, to which he had been a stranger for full 10 months, he knew that he was alive, and began to bellow, "Let me out! Let me out!" Then, setting his head to the lid of the tomb, he heaved amain, whereby the lid, being insecure, started, and he was already thrusting it aside, when the monks, matins being now ended, ran to the spot, and recognized Ferrando's voice, and saw him issue from the tomb; by which unwonted event they were all so affrighted that they took to flight, and hied them to the abbot, who, rising as if from prayer, said, "Sons, be not afraid. Take the cross and the holy water, and follow me, and let us see what sign of his might God will vouchsafe us." And so he led the way to the tomb, beside which they found Ferrando standing, deathly pale by reason of his long estrangement from the light. On sight of the abbot he ran and threw himself at his feet, saying, "My father, it has been revealed to me that 'tis to your prayers, and those of St. Benedict and my lady, that I owe my release from purgatorial pain, and restoration to life. Wherefore 'tis my prayer that God give you a good year and good calends to-day and all days." "Laud we the power of God," said the abbot. "Go then, son, as God has restored thee to earth, comfort thy wife, who since thou didst depart this life has been ever in tears, and mayst thou live henceforth in the love and service of God." "Sir," answered Ferrando, "'tis well said, and, for the doing, trust me that as soon as I find her I shall kiss her, such is the love I bear her." So saying, he went his way, and the abbot, left alone with his monks, made as if he marvelled greatly at the affair, and caused devoutly chant the Miserere. So Ferrando returned to his hamlet, where all that saw him fleeing, as folk are wont to flee from spectacles of horror, he called them back, asseverating that he was risen from the tomb. His wife at first was no less timorous, but as folk began to take heart of grace, perceiving that he was alive, they plied him with many questions, all which he answered as one that had returned with ripe experience, and gave them tidings of the souls of their kinsfolk, and told of his own invention the prettiest fables of the purgatorial state, and in full folk moot recounted the revelation vouchsafed him by the mouth of Ragnolo Brachiello before his resuscitation. Thus was Ferrando reinstated in his property, and reunited to his wife, who, being pregnant, as he thought, by himself, chanced by the time of her delivery to countenance the vulgar error that the woman must bear the infant in the womb for exactly 9 months, and gave birth to a male child, who was named Benedetto Ferrondi. Ferrando's return from purgatory, and the report he brought thence, immeasurably enhanced the fame of the abbot's holiness. So Ferrando, cured of his jealousy by the thrashings which he had gotten for it, verified the abbot's prediction, and never offended the lady again in that sort. Wherefore she lived with him, as before, in all outward seemliness, albeit she failed not, as occasion served, to foregather with the holy abbot, who had so well and sedulously served her in her especial need. End of Day 3, the 8th story.